I often look at the world and don't know what I truly want from it. I see people suffering and I wish I could take it away. I see others committing acts of cruelty and I wish there to be justice. I see a world where food gets thrown out for not being sold quickly enough while people starve. Bombs drop over territorial disputes when we have more than enough shelter to go around. Wars fought under religions and guesstimations on how we think the world works, justifying anything to make it acceptable for us to kill one another. It feels lost. I did not choose to be born. None of us chose to be born. And here we are in an imperfect world surrounded by injustices, our needs, our wants, our most selfish desires, our dreams, our petty grievances. We are left to live in it. I get why people turn to religion, because otherwise you have to accept that we're making our own fucked up purpose in this world. And that just feels so hopeless. There's a quote in my channel bio. Most of you probably haven't read it. I don't expect you to. Who the fuck reads channel bios? But I picked it because it meant something to me about why I love storytelling in films. The quote goes like this: show the audience life, and they'll find within themselves the means to assess it and appreciate it. It is kind of my mission statement in a way. I view art as just another way for humans to share our emotions with each other, to understand and feel that unique consciousness we all have. On this channel, I hope to get people to watch movies they have never considered watching before, or to think about one differently, or to think about art in general differently, or maybe pursue creating art with a new mindset. I want to put a part of myself in this, and while I will explain certain things, it will be up to you what you take away from this. That's why I love film. That's what I get from it. And that quote is by one of my personal favorite filmmakers, Andrei Tarkovsky. Tarkovsky's style is unique and powerful. And yes, it's slow. Many would consider him one of the most famous leaders in the slow cinema genre. He lets his shots play out and develop, often with long, unbroken takes, large gaps of silence. There's a feeling of digestion and engagement with each of his films, a thought at what was being said and what wasn't. Famously, he referred to filmmaking as sculpting in time. And as such, to find the truth, you have to let the camera roll. It provides details that could be lost in translation and editing. I mean, Jean-Luc Godard said cinema is truth 24 times a second, and every cut is a lie. And Mikhail Haneke responded to it with, film is 24 lies per second at the service of truth, or at the service of the attempt to find the truth. In that sense, time can be sculpted in many ways. It can lie and cheat, but it can also reveal honesty within us. I think Tarkovsky's films aim for slow moments of unfolding emotional weight because that is what a lot of life is. To Tarkovsky, that time spent, those moments of silent rumination, those make all the difference in the world. Because whether you're lying or telling the truth to yourself, it's where push comes to shove. His films can also be quite poetic. After all, his father was a poet whose work would appear in lots of his son's films. But it wasn't just that. Tarkovsky's films flow visually like a sonnet. They drift and loosely connect, rarely telling you exactly what they're doing. An emotional rhyming and association that was less concerned with typical narrative exposition and more connection to the soul. They're subtle and dreamlike and abstract, but also full of heart, and of all, very personal. One only has to look at his 1975 autobiographical masterpiece Mirror to see how much he was willing to pull from himself, to analyze, to rip apart. And visually, the camera floats, often steady, using dollies and jibs to move the camera as smoothly as possible. It adds to this ethereal, omniscient, yet personal feeling. The camera feels like a part of the character's perspectives via how it follows them so closely, and yet it also glides with the grace of a ballerina, an all-seeing observer. He made only 7 films before passing of cancer at the age of 54, and yet all of them are seen in some way as canonical pieces to understanding film. And yet, Tarkovsky's brilliance also feels so attainable and human because he was very openly an opinionated film nerd. He worshipped the greats of Ingmar Bergman, Robert Bresson, Carl Theodor Dreyer, Akira Kurosawa, Luis Buñuel, Kenji Mizoguchi, Hiroshi Teshigara. Funnily enough, directors he'd now also be put on the same pedestal as. He wrote about his own theories on film, what he loved, even being opinionated about his own peers. Stanley Kubrick adored Tarkovsky's film Solaris to the day he died, but that did not stop Andre from saying he made it because he thought 2001: A Space Odyssey was phony and lacking in real emotion, and wanted to one-up it. As you can probably tell, I disagree. It's one of my favorite movies. And yet I also love Solaris and much of Tarkovsky's work. I once had someone in my comments on Letterboxd complain I was a hypocrite because I love 2001 but praised Tarkovsky, and I don't know, man. I don't care if they had beef. Good movie is good movie to me. You need both 2001 and Solaris, like the world needs both optimism and pessimism. Fire and ice. The Patriots and the Jets. Hi, butt fumble fans.
I have never seen this before in my life. Watch this. Vince Wilfork is going to throw Brandon Moore back into his quarterback. He's going to fumble the football.
Andrei Tarkovsky was a film nerd, a filmmaker, and eventually a film god. A man who looked up to Ingmar Bergman only for them to both end their careers as peers. He inspired several filmmakers who are now respected today. Krzysztof Kieslowski, Abhijit Esteko, Bela Tarr, Terrence Malick, B. Gan, who I recently saw at a Q&A for his latest film Resurrection. And Lars von Trier, who is his own separate video altogether, but we're not getting into that yet. God, I'm not ready to touch on all that mess.
Okay, I'm a Nazi.
So Andrei Tarkovsky's love for film, poetry, the philosophy of being, all of that would impact his legacy and style tremendously. But there is one important detail I've left out. As you might have guessed by his last name, Andrei Tarkovsky was Russian. A Russian born in 1932 and dying in 1986. And I don't know if any of you are history buffs, but there was some stuff going on in Russia during that time. Yeah, you know, maybe you heard of it. The United States of America, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, also referred to as the Soviet Union, were in many ways the two dominant forces in the world of the 20th century. Both opposed in ideology, America favoring the system of capitalism, while the Soviet Union, which centered around the state of Russia, favored communism. Well, okay. Technically, both had unique variations and interpretations of each ideology throughout their years and each change in leader, and you can absolutely get into the weeds on each interpretation, what they mean, if they truly count, if they represent the ideology at large truly. But for simplicity's sake, we are going to refer to each nation with how they define themselves, because we just need to establish the basic framework of the Cold War. Please do not kill me. Once Hitler painted his finest work all over the back of his bunker wall, and later with the individual surrender of each Axis nation, the world stood at a new turning point, having squashed the growth of Nazi Germany. And with building resentment and desire for growth in each nation, the United States and the Soviet Union would spend a good half of the century pitching a battle for world supremacy. Good thing for all of us, during that prior war, the United States had developed a superweapon known as the nuclear bomb, which had the potentiality to wreak a horrifying devastation on each enemy, a discovery that was met by the Soviets building their own in return, and both stockpiling until they had the potentiality to destroy the other, each intending to respond to the other with the exact same force if provoked, under the theory of mutually assured destruction, potentially triggering a worldwide nuclear holocaust that could doom humanity.
Well, let me finish, Dimitri. Let me finish, Dimitri. Well, listen, how do you think I feel about it?
Naturally, knowing that any direct conflict would lead to that inevitable world-ending conclusion, they instead decided to fight the war from a distance, through proxies and colonies. Spying was the name of the game. Misinformation to breed distrust of the other, propaganda to induce national pride, using covert operations in the CIA and KGB to influence other countries' governments indirectly so they could gain allies, which also led to the installation of various dictators, mostly fascists installed by the United States to combat socialism, all with that threat of the end of humanity hanging over everyone, especially citizens of the United States and the Soviet Union. By the fall of the Berlin Wall, when it reached its end, everyone had warped ideas of each other's nations. Culture became a parody, everyone was kind of sick of it and just wanted it to end. And so in that divide and surrounding it, art movements came and were reinterpreted and spread outwards in different ways around the globe. One of which being film. And while America may have been where film was arguably birthed from that horse in motion in Northern California, the history of early film innovation is a lot more global and did not care as much for the invisible lines we draw between countries. And so if we're gonna talk about film, we have to talk about it in the context of the Soviet Union as well, not just our American ideas. In fact, it could be argued that the Soviet Union truly were the first to master the medium of film. Vladimir Lenin once said that of all the arts, the most important to us is cinema. That can be seen in the innovation of early Soviet filmmakers. There was Lev Kuleshov and his presentation of the Kuleshov effect, which showed that by interspersing a close-up with any shot, you can change the context of how the audience reads their expression. Sergei Eisenstein went further with his theories on the Soviet montage, seeing individual shots as part of a whole narrative created when spliced together. You can see this represented in the iconic Odessa Steppes sequence in Battleship Potemkin, where lines of soldiers shoot indiscriminately into a crowd of protesters, interspliced with the lost baby carriage falling down the steps, presumably to the infant's death. A sequence that, yes, you've seen done in homage before. It's kinda everywhere. Returning to the original though, it's interesting to see how montage theory connects each of these ideas together through editing. The implication being that, from here on, innocence has been lost. A representation of the revolution becoming a need more than a want. Add in Man with a Movie Camera's self-reflective meta-framing, you get a picture of the Soviet Union as one of the most important cinematic forces of its era. An era that would face its first huge hurdle in 1934 with the introduction of the doctrine of socialist realism. Lenin had died in the midst of those innovations, with Stalin taking control of the Soviet Union. And while Lenin had seen artistic innovation as important to the Soviet Union's cultural outreach, Stalin preferred to focus on how art could facilitate state propaganda more effectively. His policy of socialist realism would primarily reduce art in the Soviet Union to works that would either highlight Russian history or would center around a presentation of realistic life in a Soviet society. As you might imagine, these restrictions meant that artistic control and freedom became more limited. Films were judged deeply by the state before they were permitted to release, and many pieces of art were withheld from release, including much of the poetry of Andrei Tarkovsky's father. It is also of important note that around each of these milestones, the United States went through a similar age of restricting artistic freedom with the Hays Code, favoring American Christian values that controlled what people were allowed to perceive and was meant as a limiter on the behavior of people as well. So yeah, if you were gonna go back into some Cold War rant about how this is how America was better, we both did it. Regardless, World War II would come, the United States and Russia would find themselves briefly allies before the Cold War began. The Soviet Union's artistic scene faltered and fizzled out on a grand stage, while America maintained, but with a certain expectation of conformity that still limited artists for a long time. But then, in 1953, a year prior to Andrei Tarkovsky entering film school, Joseph Stalin did something very, very interesting. He fucking died.
Oh, this is calamity. Calamity. Oh, no. Oh, he's on the floor.
And under the new leadership of Nikita Khrushchev, restrictions on art and more authoritarian policies that had been present all of Stalin's tenure were loosened. Imagine, in a way, like you're Andrei Tarkovsky. Your father is a poet who got routinely censored. You're considering becoming a filmmaker. And as you prepare to enter that field, decades of film innovation and current day experimentation from outside your country, outside the Iron Curtain, become finally available to you. You're discovering artists who mix poetry and film, innovation unseen by anyone of your age in Russia. You see Bergman, Pressing, Kurosawa, Dreyer. You watch Italian neorealism and the French New Wave as they happen. You watch Russia produce its own masterpieces in that vein. And as you learn and reach 30, you're finally able to make your first film. Imagine the love of expression that would breed. The beauty of such an important era in filmmaking unfolding at such an important time in your life, while knowing your father had missed out on this opportunity. You make your first film. It's a major success in your home country and abroad as the very filmmakers you look up to start to praise you. You plan your next film, a grand historical epic that pushes your form even further. What could possibly go wrong? Nikita Khrushchev is ousted as leader of the Soviet Union, and many of his policies are reversed, bringing in a much more hostile environment for creative freedom. And before any of my fellow Americans laugh at that, I want to remind you that around the same time of creative freedom during the thaw, the United States had started to wane on the Hays Code, only to switch to the Red Scare around the same time and blacklist a bunch of artists. So, let's not pretend forbidding the release of certain artistic endeavors is uniquely Soviet. We were just as efficient at squashing creative freedoms. All of Tarkovsky's remaining films produced in the USSR would face difficulties in production, release, and/or reception by the Soviet government. The last of which being 1979's Stalker, my third favorite film of all time, behind these two. And it's free to watch on YouTube. I'm not even kidding. Link in the description. I would recommend watching it on a good TV with no interruptions, but I'm happy for you to even just give it a chance on your phone or laptop too. I'm going to try and summarize it as best as I can, but as mentioned, the long meditative gaps in between are actually pretty essential to the film itself, so yeah. I'd recommend pausing, watching the movie first if you haven't, and returning if you can. It's worthwhile, I promise you. And yet, despite its legacy and my love for the film, the Soviet government ended up actually taking issue with its slow pace and wordy back and forth. They asked for him to trim it down and make it more exciting, worried audience members might walk out. Tarkovsky reportedly responded by saying, "I am only interested in the views of two people. One is called Bresson, and one called Bergman." Bars. But before we get into the film, it is important to note that Stalker isn't just a movie. It is also, in a way, a franchise. Okay, I'm being a bit cheeky. Technically, none of these versions connect to each other. Essentially, it all originates from Roadside Picnic, a 1972 science fiction novel written by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky, which introduced the idea of the zone, a mysterious area beyond human comprehension, which at the center holds the power to grant one wish, and that is rarely entered except for the humans who illegally trespass there, named Stalkers. This then was adapted and shifted into the version of the zone in the film, which maintains both those key elements but moves around everything else. Then finally, decades later, a Ukrainian game studio by the name of GSC Game World took the versions of the Zone from the book and the movie, mixed them together, and placed them in the fallout of the Chernobyl power plant disaster to create the Stalker video game series. Granted, getting the Stalker games playable and modded and decoding the community shibboleths and insider speak is about as difficult as entering and exiting the Zone itself. They're less video games and more excuses to browse ModDB, reboot your PC, and call people obscure Russian insults. But you get to understand what this means.
Hello, чики-брики в дамке!
But the film is the primary avenue I'm going to engage with in this video. This is a movie channel after all. Occasionally we'll check in and reference the novel and the games, but it's mostly going to be the film. Also, I only have a decade-old MacBook, so don't expect me to touch on the latest title in the series. That game had supercomputers struggling on release, and I definitely don't have one of those. Support me on Patreon if you want me to play Stalker 2. Our titular Stalker wakes up in the bed he shares with his wife and their disabled daughter. As he goes to prepare for his journey, his wife isn't happy. Apparently, he had promised not to do this anymore. The Zone is quarantined by the military, who do not dare go in anymore. They guard it from the Stalkers. Entry is off limits. And the next time the Stalker gets caught, he'll get a 10-year sentence instead. And yet, he's drawn back to the Zone anyway. It's his profession and his passion. But he doesn't travel to the Zone for himself, though. He's only the guide. Because of the mystic power held in the Zone, and the room at the center that it is said will grant your deepest wish, people will pay under the table for a guide to get them through the Zone. This is where we meet our two supporting characters who will join us on this journey, the writer and the professor. The writer arrives drunk with a girl on his arm who he's trying to win over, and who the Stalker immediately sends off because she was not part of the deal. They meet up at a bar with the professor and chat back and forth, waiting for the train they'll follow in. The professor has scientific curiosity. He wants to study the properties of the Zone, and the writer wishes for some inspiration, and thinks he'll find it in the Zone, or at least be able to beg for it in the room if push comes to shove. Avoiding being caught by the patrolling military outside in a revelatory stealth sequence, they follow the train past the gate that would allow them to enter the Zone, avoid gunfire, hop from their car to a real car, and follow the tracks until finally... they enter the Zone. This is actually not an uncommon motif of Tarkovsky, playing between black and white and color to express different themes. Nearly all of Tarkovsky's films play with this interplay. His film Solaris famously switches between monochrome, stark and cold, and a vibrant technicolor all over the film's trip on the highway to the space shuttle launch, each representing the color schemes of memory, the space station, and Earth. Granted, I'm sure you thought of something else too. It's a classic visual. Everyone knows it, and it changed cinema forever. There's also a lot of variations on it. Pleasantville used it to contrast between 1950s TV conformity and 90s teen culture and freedom of choice. Schindler's List used it to highlight the little girl's coat to provide a visual for the destruction of precious innocent Jewish lives. And again, at the end, to show the modern-day survivors and actors paid tribute to Schindler's grave. And one of my favorites is A Matter of Life and Death, where heaven is in black and white and the Earth is Technicolor, opposite what you'd expect to show the protagonist's desire to keep living even if he was meant to die by fate. But I think it would be fair to say Stalker is channeling Dorothy most obviously, which also makes the differences between the films' representations stand out. Oz is bright and colorful, at least in the original. We're not acknowledging Wicked's desaturated version. It's supposed to represent a beautiful imagination and wonder and beauty. But the Zone is still mostly naturalistic and muted. It has color and beauty, but it's a much more grounded presentation of it. Instead of vibrant bright colors, cool tones dominate the landscape. I think that's by design, because the zone is not a source of whimsy or fun. It's a mysterious and familiar, yet unlike anything in logical space we'd see in real life. You look at the zone as familiar, and yet not. It mostly takes the form of an overgrown forest with rapidly changing terrains. Like sometimes the ground will appear as tile and then gives straight to grass and dirt. Terrains appear and disappear. It's a grassy, confusing, off-kilter land of wilderness hostile to all outsiders. And it appears to be particularly hostile to outsiders who do not wander in respectfully. Like the state of New Hampshire, which should also be quarantined by the military. There's seas of abandoned tanks left at the entrance. They broke down entering the zone, which did not permit them to enter with violent intent. This is actually different to the book and games. The games are filled with hostile mutants and rival factions wishing to control the zone. It is a shooter as well as an RPG after all. It kinda has to have things to shoot. And it's kinda hard to shoot at vague philosophies. So instead, you'll shoot at people who have those philosophies. This message was brought to you by the Central Intelligence Agency. The movie treats the zone as more of a psychological threat. It won't directly kill you, but trap you by changing its geography until you become lost, taking you into dreamlike trances and playing with your perceptions. It's an abstract terror, something unknowable, and it completely upsets our ideas of death coming from some form of violence or physical trauma appearing on the body. Instead, death swarms around you. In the book, though, it's actually closer to the games. There are violent mutants prowling throughout the zone, though less so than in the games, and the traps can be more directly violent and involve individual, often classifiable artifacts. I personally find the film's interpretation the most interesting from a philosophical, metaphorical approach. It speaks to the unknowable and allows the zone to exist beyond our ideas. And it makes the zone completely vacant and still. You may find long dead skeletons, but no living humans outside of the ones in your party. At least that we can see. I mean, admittedly, in no version do you really see a lot of people, but in the film we only see our protagonists and the dead. And they imply that is very much what they expected. It gives the zone this lonely atmosphere and a mysterious simplicity, like the idea of violence has not crossed its mind. Only punishment for those who break the rules or don't respect the zone. In that way, it is a power that attracts, but leaves itself untouched.
Зона требует к себе уважения, иначе она карает.
Befittingly, the way the Stalker guides them through the zone is bizarre. He throws handkerchiefs attached to lug nuts, sees where they fall, and then directs his followers to go that way as he brings up the rear. He says they'll take the roundabout route, as the seemingly direct route often led to more danger and took longer. But the writer decides to disobey him and walk off in a direct path, only to hear...
Стойте, не двигайтесь. Зачем вы? Что зачем? Зачем вы его остановили? Как? Я думал, это вы.
A voice cries out of the ether, warning him to stop. He turns around, being spared by the trap, and they continue on their way. The professor notices he's left his rucksack behind, and the Stalker warns not to go back, as the path that came in would not remain the same. As the Stalker and the writer crawl along a waterfall and waterway, they realize he's gone. They accept he's possibly lost forever, only to see him ahead of them.
Невероятно, но как вам удалось обогнать нас? Как обогнать нас? Я вернулся сюда за рюкзаком.
And if you notice closely, this was indeed exactly where they had been prior. For the first time, the Stalker looks above him and realizes that they had just walked through a trap, and somehow were let through. Twice now, the zone has granted them mercy. They decide to stop and rest there, feeling relieved, but also mystified. Meanwhile, the writer and professor bicker about each other's reasons for being there.
В институте мы на плохом счету. Средств на экспедицию нам не дают. Набьем-ка мы наш рюкзак всякими там манометрами, дерьмометрами. Проникнем в зону нелегально. И все здешние чудеса поверим алгеброй. Ну, натурально. Все разевают рты и хором кричат. Нобелевскую ему!
Писателишка вы задрипанный, психолог доморощенный. Вам бы стены в сортирах расписывать. Трепло бездарное.
The comparison of writing and psychology, both ways of trying to understand humanity, but one more scientific and the other dealing more with understanding the personal, is actually a really fascinating dichotomy to me. In fact, it could be said that the professor is the logical half of our brain, and the writer our emotional half, and how both seem to struggle with finding purpose and satisfaction. As the entails, the professor is confident and assured, but pretty cold, while the writer is falling apart at the seams, but full of personality and introspection. Around the zone from this point on, we see a black dog that follows them throughout the zone and out. Feels like a spirit of the zone, a black dog being both an omen of death, the church grim, and a loyal companion, fittingly ambiguous for the zone itself. They move on to the next point. They come across a long train that the stalker knows they must cross, but neither the writer or professor really trust what they may find down it. The stalker seems scared of it too. He has them decide who goes forward based on drawing matches. First with the writer, who immediately draws the long match and must go first. It's a long walk, and the stalker seems to hide behind the professor despite being the guide himself. When they finally get to the other side and must get across a waterway, the stalker asks the writer to wait at the exit before going forward. But the writer at this point is fed up and goes forward anyway, walking in the wrong direction, right into a trap. But the writer ends up safe and sound, completely unharmed.
Ну и везет же вам. Боже мой, да теперь... Теперь вы 100 лет жить будете. Да. А почему не вечно? Как вечный жид.
Okay, so this is a loaded one. The legend of the Wandering Jew is an amalgam myth from the Middle Ages about a Jewish man who chastised Christ before crucifixion and was cursed to walk the earth until Jesus returned. Never allowed the rest of death or heaven, and cursed with the knowledge that he had attacked the man he now saw as his savior. It is maybe a bit problematic in this modern day. Like a lot of Middle Age myths of the crucifixion, it is filled with anti-Semitism to justify their current bigotries. After all, it was mostly the Romans. But we do get the idea here. Is the writer lucky to be alive? To keep on living? Or is living a curse in of itself? Is his continued existence a curse? None of us asked to be born or to one day die. Is life a gift? Or a burden? This is clearly one of the central questions of the movie. Why do people all reach for this power? This wish-granting room? Well, to escape. If you're really, truly satisfied in life, you don't really need to brave any wilderness to make a wish at all. But people still do it, and thus must be unhappy. The military presence, the derelict poverty, the dour feeling that the zone, for all its dangers, is preferable to the Stalker than his real life, that he would take his family with him and live in the zone if he could, it spells out an existence where people are unhappy. Does power give you that happiness? Could you use the power to create happiness? That is the core of why people travel there. The Stalker says that the writer must be a kind soul to have been spared so much by the zone. The pipe they went down is called the meat grinder, and usually the person who enters first doesn't come out. It is here that the writer reveals that he saw that it was just 2 long matchsticks offered to him. The Stalker had chosen him to go first. Neither of the options was going to lead to him going second. The Stalker had chosen him to go first, expecting him to die, and then pretended there was any chance involved. Though to the Stalker, he had just viewed the writer's previous survival as proof of his favor.
Я никогда сам не выбираю. Я всегда боюсь. Вы не представляете себе, как это страшно ошибиться. Но ведь кто-то должен идти первым.
Да. Нет, это не клиника. Видите ли, кто-то должен идти первым. Как вам это нравится?
You know, for all the philosophizing I'm doing, all the slow pacing, all the deliberate drip feeding of the narrative, this movie can be really fucking funny when it wants to be. Professor grabs the phone, dials up his clinic, saying he knew someone there had left the phone there on a prior expedition. The man at the clinic chews him out, tells him that after what he's about to do, he's done as a scientist. And the professor says he doesn't care. He's at the foot of the door. It'll be done soon.
Что это вы там такое затеяли? А, профессор?
А вы представляете, что будет, когда в эту самую комнату поверят все? И когда они все кинутся сюда, все эти несостоявшиеся императоры, великие инквизиторы, фюреры всех мастей, и такие благодетели рода человеческого. И не за деньгами, не за вдохновением, а мир переделывать.
Нет, я таких сюда не беру, я же понимаю.
Да что вы можете понимать, смешной вы человек? Потом не один же вы на свете сталкер. Да никто из сталкеров и не знает, с чем сюда приходят, и с чем отсюда уходят те, которых вы ведете. А количество немотивированных преступлений растет. Не ваша ли это работа? А военные перевороты? А мафия в правительствах, не ваши ли это клиенты?
Неужели вы верите в эти сказки?
В страшные, да. В добрые нет, а в страшные сколько угодно.
At this point, they're at the threshold of the room, just steps away. Stalker asks who would like to go first. The writer says he's unable, and the professor is happy to reveal his plan.
Это всего-навсего бомба. Что-что? Шутка. Нет. Просто бомба, 20 килотонн. Зачем?
Никому, как видно, никакого счастья место это не принесет. А если попадет в дурные руки... Впрочем, я теперь уже не знаю. Но пока эта язва здесь открыта для всякой сволочи, ни сна, ни покоя. Отдайте.
Отдайте!
They scuffle. The writer finally gets the Stalker to stop attacking the professor, and we find out what the zone means to the Stalker.
Ведь ничего не осталось. У людей на земле больше. Это ведь единственное место, куда можно прийти, если надеяться больше не на что. Ведь вы же пришли. Зачем же уничтожаете веру? Замолчи!
Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But we'll get into that later. The Stalker sees hope. We all want to see hope. But the professor asks what may be lost in the name of someone's true desire if they have malicious intentions. Think about the era, the time, two massive world powers fighting culturally with proxies, controlling countries and young armies like pawns, but unable to fight directly because if they were, it would destroy the world. There are people on both sides arguing that a preemptive strike to eliminate their enemy is all they need to win.
You're talking about mass murder, General, not war.
Mr. President, I'm not saying we wouldn't get our hair mussed, but I do say no more than 10 to 20 million killed, tops, depending on the breaks.
You have to decide then. Who gets to lead the charge? Who gets to decide how the world progresses? Who deserves to end the world? Because you are giving them that power. Maybe the winner will create a utopia. Maybe they're right. It's just that in their wake, they may wipe out half or more of the globe. Are you comfortable with that hope? Are you sure it would never come to that if you gave someone that power? When two tribes go to war, a single point is all you can score. Yes, I'm referencing Frankie Goes to Hollywood, fuck you. So the Stalker, the guide, our forward motion, sees the optimism of the zone. The Professor, this logical scientific force, sees a tool that can also be misused, and how that could make the world worse. If the Professor is our logical side, and the Stalker is our need to keep going, what does our creative side see in the zone? What does the writer see? To tell you that, I must tell you about the Stalker's mentor, Porcupine. Throughout the film, we've heard about the Stalker's mentor, a man whom he calls Porcupine. Apparently, he taught the Stalker all he knows, and then one day, he went through the zone with his brother. The zone punished him with incredible riches.
Это что, наказание такое?
А через неделю повесился.
Upon telling the pair that the meat grinder often took at least one person who went through, he says that days before his suicide, right before he became rich, Porcupine lost his brother in the meat grinder. The very meat grinder the Stalker had intended to sacrifice the writer to. And this has made the writer figure something out.
Вот почему, по-твоему, повесился дикобраз?
Он в зону пришел с корыстной целью и брата своего загубил в мясорубке из-за денег.
Это я понимаю. А почему он все-таки повесился? Почему еще раз не пошел? Теперь уж точно не за деньгами, а за братом. Да здесь он понял, что не просто желания, а сокровенные желания исполняются. Да здесь то сбудется, что натуре твоей соответствует сути, о которой ты понятия не имеешь, и она в тебе сидит и всю жизнь тобой управляет. Дон Феттил уже на коленях ползал, брата вымаливал, а получил кучу денег. И ничего иного получить не мог. Потому что дикобразу дикобразово. А совесть, душевные муки, это все придумано от головы. Понял он все это и повесился.
The writer concludes he doesn't want to see who he truly is inside, who he is when all pretenses are taken away, when push comes to shove. It's easy to believe that you would be responsible with power when you don't have it. But put yourself in a room with that button, the power to mold the world, no responsibilities or guilt. What do you think you do? What do you justify to yourself because it's what you would have truly wanted? And once you know that, can you actually live with who you truly are inside? Is it better to never know then? To never give yourself the chance? The writer sits next to the Stalker. Professor disassembles his bomb and gives up on his quest, and they sit together as the camera pulls out, a reflective long one take, a staple of Tarkovsky's visual language, and they sit there and think about it all. After about 2 minutes of that stillness, It rains. Maybe the zone is weeping. Over time, the rain dies down, and eventually they'll leave, none of them having entered the room. It's here where I'd like to discuss the endings for each edition of the story. Let's start with the original novel, Roadside Picnic. The novel's setup is different from the films. The Stalker has a name, for one, Redrick, and it's comprised of several select moments from his life and excursions related to the zone. As such, there is no singular journey like the one in the film, no writer or professor, just various events in his life. Instead, we have the setup. The zone has formed seemingly from alien visitation, the people of Earth are struggling to understand it, and restrict access to the areas due to dangers, while there is a culture of stalkers sneaking in to find relics for profit. There is this deep sense of wonder about the alien life that may have left the zone behind. What they knew that we didn't. If they'd ever come back, if there was even a larger purpose to this, or if this was just a pit stop on their way, a roadside picnic in a way, human beings become incapable of understanding the true knowledge of the zone because they cannot comprehend the beings that left it behind. Redrick studies the zone and is a stalker in his off time, and knowing that the children of stalkers are often mutated, him and his girlfriend decide to have the child anyway out of love. While she was purely human at birth and they gave her the nickname Monkey, now she's starting to resemble an actual monkey. While this doesn't happen in the movie, we do have footage of her from a different adaptation.
With the floor show, kicking with your torso.
Finally, he decides to take a trip to the wish-granting golden sphere at the center of the zone, hoping to reverse his daughter's mutation. He goes along with his mentor's son into the zone, not informing the boy of the existence of the meat grinder. The boy approaches the sphere as Frederick watches.
At first, he didn't hear what this talking key was shouting, but then something seemed to switch on inside him, and he heard,
Happiness for everyone! Free! As much happiness as you want! Everyone gather around! Plenty for everyone! No one will be forgotten! Free! Happiness! Free!
With that, he abruptly went quiet, as if a huge hand had forcefully shoved a gag into his mouth, and Redrick saw the transparent emptiness lurking in the shadow of the excavator bucket grab him, jerk him up into the air, and slowly, with an effort, twist him, the way a housewife wrings out the laundry. Redrick had the time to notice one of the dusty shoes flying off a twitching foot and soar high above the quarry. He turned around and sat down. There was a single thought in his head, and he somehow stopped being able to sense himself. Silence hung in the air, and it was especially silent behind his back on the road.
With the meat grinder now disabled and the boy dead, Redrick has his chance to approach the sphere, to ask it to reverse his daughter's mutations. And yet he realizes that there is a larger power to all of this. His daughter's mutations went back to the zone. His father was resurrected as a zombie by the zone. The zone's relics weaponized against his life. His friends lost. He becomes overwhelmed in thought about the zone's role in his life itself.
Let them pay for everything. May those bastards suffer. Let them eat shit like I did. No, that's all wrong, Red. It's right, of course, but what does it actually mean? What do I need? These are curses, not thoughts. He was chilled by some terrible premonition and, instantly skipping the many different arguments still lying ahead, ordered himself ferociously, Look here, you red-headed asshole. You aren't gonna leave this place until you figure it out. You'll keel over next to this ball, you'll burn, you'll rot, bastard. But you aren't going anywhere. He knew that it all had to be destroyed, and he longed to destroy it. But he could guess that if it were all gone, then there'd be nothing left. only flat, bare earth. The helplessness and despair again made him want to lean against the sphere and throw his head back. So he got up, mechanically dusted off his pants, and began descending into the quarry. He was covered in sweat and suffocating from the heat, but at the same time he was chilled to the bone, trembling hard all over as if hung over, and the flavorless chalk dust was crunching between his teeth. And he was no longer trying to think. He just kept repeating to himself in despair, like a prayer, "I'm an animal. You can see that I'm an animal. I have no words. They haven't taught me the words. I don't know how to think. Those bastards didn't let me learn how to think. But if you really are all-powerful, all-knowing, all-understanding,
figure it out! Look into my soul. I know everything you need is in there. It has to be. Because I've never sold my soul to anyone. It's mine. It's human. Figure it out yourself, what I want. Because I know it can't be bad. The hell with it all. I just can't think of a thing other than those words of his. Happiness! Free! For everyone! And let no one be forgotten!
He's overwhelmed by all these feelings. On one hand, the exploitation of his life and suffering he's endured. On the other, the fact that the zone is his very livelihood and all that he is. Even deeper inside him is the sense of power that this moment gives him. He can seek vengeance, but he can also create a better world. The sphere is at his beck and call. And in the end, he feels like he can't trust himself to figure it all out. He demands it figure out what he truly wants because he doesn't know himself. Till finally ending on the same desperate plea for world happiness that his mentor's son had just shouted out. In the end, he's haunted by the simple fact that they're all pawns in a much greater plan they don't understand. All exploiting the resources of the results of a much more important race's roadside picnic. And none of them have the knowledge to reach the point of the alien race that left the zone behind. The games, of course, all have their own choices of ending, with two true endings for the original entry, Shadow of Chernobyl, where the truth behind the zone is revealed and you are given the choice to join it or destroy it. In all three stories, though, the idea of power is reckoned with in some way, dealing with the concept of wish granting. The knowledge to find your purpose, the knowledge to make a better world, the knowledge to exploit the world, the systems of greed at play. Every time, the characters are overwhelmed with the sheer magnitude of the zone's power and reach. They're overwhelmed by the idea that, well, to quote Lord Acton, as I alluded to earlier,
power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Great men are almost always bad men, even when they exercise influence and not authority. Still more when you superadd the tendency of the certainty of corruption by authority.
Keep in mind the environment that created this film. The Soviet Union censors were harsh on Tarkovsky, wanting to change the film to release it for maximum audience appreciation. But he refused. He saw his father limited in his art, and now that he was an adult, he dealt with the same issues. One of his Soviet peers, who was inspired by his debut film, Ivan's Childhood, Sergei Porozhnov, went on to create his masterpiece, The Color of Pomegranates, as a result. A stunning work of film mastery beloved to this day, which was heavily censored at the time and helped get the director arrested and sentenced to hard labor for subversion. That meant that throughout Tarkovsky's heyday in the 70s, Porozhnov was unable to make any films despite being inspired by Tarkovsky. Tarkovsky would himself leave the Soviet Union to visit Italy, where he wished to co-produce his next film, Nostalgia, alongside the Soviets. But the Soviets would pull funding and accuse Tarkovsky of being a dissident and trying to run from the USSR by traveling to Italy. Knowing that returning would mean persecution and further censorship, he decided to spend the remainder of his life making films in exile, despite the fact that he loved and missed his homeland. And at that time, after Stalker releases, it's the 80s. Cold War fevers are picking up. Not only is the Soviet Union in a precarious position of control, but with the rise of Reaganism in the United States comes a new line of patriotism and conformity. A form of social conservatism based around consumerism and subservience to God, all with that atom bomb casting a shadow over all of it. The CIA interfering to control the spread of anti-capitalist ideas in other parts of the world, and responding instead by raising up several fascistic and cruel dictators. Both sides were trying to manipulate the future of Afghanistan, which led to the creation of the Taliban and anti-imperialist sentiments in the Middle East, and a feeling that maybe neither country truly deserved the power to wipe out the other. In the end, neither side would drop the bomb, but both countries still have issues with those in power censoring dissident voices, with threats to expand, civil rights issues, and mass corruption in systems of power. And I have to mention that the latest Stalker game had difficulties in its later development cycle because the studio's location in Kiev became a war zone in the midst of the Russian invasion of Ukraine by Vladimir Putin. And while I'm unsure if Roadside Picnic has been pulled from the shelves, it is notable that the most banned book in the United States last year was a fellow dystopian sci-fi countercultural work on control and manipulation and power with an iconic film, Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange.
Stop it, please, I beg you!
But hey, I'm sure that there's no major American politicians and high-ranking presidential candidates that are stupid enough to run a platform on wanting to irradiate and destroy a major part of the Earth via nuclear weapons and mass death like we all feared so, right?
We will carpet bomb them into oblivion. I don't know if sand can glow in the dark, but we're going to find out.
Absolute power corrupts all. Absolutely. But is this all that can be of the world? Must we pacify humanity to stop us from destroying and exploiting each other? Is peace and happiness truly unachievable without total submission? I don't think so. I think there is a hope in a better world, a future society where corruption and greed isn't necessary, where all are equal. And it's one I think Tarkovsky sees too, based on how he ends the film. See, in the film, the Stalker's child has been born mutated, like the book, though it's not in the same non-human way. She's disabled, without the function of her legs. She's referred to as a zone victim. But the lack of the use of her legs isn't all the zone gave her. As the perspective shifts to her own, the film is back in color, presenting her as a form of the zone manifested in the real world. Once the men come back and the Stalker arrives home with his wife, daughter, and the dog he gained through his trip in the zone, as her father and mother bemoan the bittersweet nature of life and where things are imperfect, but also their love for each other and need for hope, because of the child, alone, reading, when suddenly... In a movie where characters represent different parts of us, the writers are creative side, the professor our logical side, and the stalker our persistence, the daughter is who we were before all those parts of us became so cynical, when we dared to dream.
Когда человек думает о прошлом, он становится добрее.
We can often feel so hopeless and trapped in an absurd world, but in order to create a more hopeful world one day, a better one, you need only to act in a way that introduces hope and kindness and gratitude. And that positivity, it'll grow the more nourishment, the more it spreads, the more people participate in it, like a massive sunflower. I look at a world I feel disappointed in, one where I worry about the future, where cruelty is so much of a mainstay we walk past it and give it no mind. Many have resigned themselves to it. That's just life. You gotta make the best of it all. But when I look inside myself, I see hope. I do not know what I would do with a wish from the zone, nor will I ever. Maybe I'd be corrupted by it. But I was not born corrupted. None of us were. We all have the potential of both good and bad in us. We choose whether to empathize or shut out. We choose who we deem as human. We choose to behave the way we do. Would I be incorruptible? I don't know. But I know it's possible for humans to be that way. To erase the need for the rat race, the scrounging for control. I see that hope within me, within my friends and loved ones. I don't need to trust what I would do given that power. I wish to create a world at large where the circumstances that would lead to corruption are no more. And I can do that through my actions, more than any blind wishing. In the children of future generations, we have the potential to create and imbue kindness, empathy, responsibility, and care for your fellow human. To work together. Where one day it won't come down to one person or one collective, but a united front of humanity serving a future welfare. That is possible. Maybe not now, maybe not for a long time. But we create power. We create the systems that raise people up and enforce standards. We can tear them down. We create our own power, our own knowledge, and collectively, we can do so much. That is what the child and the zone in general mean to me. Potential. Potential always has the chance to create unfair power structures, to create cruelty, to reveal the self, to exploit. But while it can be the power that muscles to dominate the world, it can also be the one that aims to uplift, to help, to aid. We have as much potential to destroy the world as we do to save it. In fact, let's look at a perfect example. Throughout the video, we've talked about the fear surrounding nuclear war, the possibility of mutually assured destruction. But the power to split the atom need not be used to destroy. It's a tool. We turned it into a weapon first, but it can do more. Across from the bar on a lake, we see a nuclear power plant framed outside. While some tragedies have overshadowed our ideas of them, it's important to remember the proper context of how they existed in 1979. This is years before the meltdown of Chernobyl, and even that was led to by improper safety. The only other meltdown of that scale was the Fukushima disaster in 2011, which was caused by a tsunami. Improper safety in an act of natural disaster. One wonders how much time we've wasted on how to use nuclear powers to dominate something that results in pain and war, and how much that could have been used harnessing its potential for good. I mean, would there have even been a Chernobyl if the subsidies and safety of nuclear properties was dedicated more to energy and safety than primarily on weapons? If we had spent years studying proper handling of its power potential rather than its destructive potential. Yes, the world is imperfect. It is flawed. It is corruptible. Power can indeed be utilized for bad, and with the current structure of the world, we have to constantly be aware of that possibility. But each individual person has the chance, much like nuclear energy, to build rather than destroy, to enrich rather than to dominate. None of us are born corrupted. We all hold a potential in us to do good. We just need a world that pushes all to that collective good independently, a care for one another. To quote Andrei Tarkovsky in his seminal book, Sculpting in Time,
"Art must carry man's craving for the ideal, must be an expression of his reaching out towards it. The art must give man hope and faith. And the more hopeless the world in the artist's version, the more clearly perhaps we see the ideal that stands in opposition. Otherwise, life becomes impossible. Art symbolizes the meaning of our existence.
We have to have hope. Tarkovsky wanted us to look at a flawed, hopeless world and still see a beautiful potential future. In 1986, Andrei Tarkovsky tragically died of cancer, possibly obtained on the set of Stalker from potential waste from the previously mentioned nuclear power plant across the stream. We don't know for certain if that's what caused it, though. Yet, if it's true, I don't think Tarkovsky would see the domino effect as a tragedy completely. Because even if it killed him, he created a monument to hope that lives to this day. I was born 12 years after he died, on the opposite side of the world, in the country that was at war with his own. And yet I'm seeing it, and I'm inspired by it. Hell, so many people are going to see it, and will see it in the future. Generations of humanity will be mesmerized by it till the end of film itself. To hope. To dream. The words Tarkovsky's wife wrote on his tombstone were, "To the man who saw the angel." Maybe the child in Stalker is an angel. Maybe there's an angel inside all of us. It's time to stop asking who deserves the power to end the world. It's the wrong question. We do not need to look for one single leader, one with the power to rule over, to keep us in line. Because the true path of the future should be a society with the collective ability to destroy the world, where that possibility never even crosses anyone's mind. A united vision of human welfare from all of us on Earth. We create that power. We have the potentiality to save the world rather than end it. That is just as much of an option. It's just a matter of if we can get to that point as a species, and I hope for our sake, humanity can get there before someone decides to drop the bomb and wipe us all out. Which will come first? It's up to us. We have the potential for salvation, destruction, and purgatory within ourselves. Just a matter of whether we save ourselves before it all goes boom. I'd like to give a special thanks to my $10 a month patrons: Arif Hassan, Kim Pine, Kate, Morgan T, Amber Rain, Katrina Q, Tegan B, Jana, and Justin Shepard.